Welcome to The Bold Book of the Day with Dr. Denise Nicholson, a show that is a central hub and safe space for authors to share their stories. The Bold Book with Dr. Denise begins now.
Hello, welcome to The Bold Book of the Day. This podcast is for anyone looking for inspiration. Today's guest is someone who defies every category you might try to put them in. And that's exactly what makes this conversation so exciting. Addam Ledamyen is an actor, a playwright, a novelist, and the founder of a 50c13 nonprofit called For Elenvia. The publications and productions an interdisciplinary arts organization using storytelling to collectively imagine a better world and figure out how to actually build it. Please welcome Addam Ledamyen.
Thank you so much for having me.
Addam, you got to tell me about your page turner. I know it's newly debuted in March, so please give the audience an inkling of what this literary fantasy is about.
Yeah, so The Legend of Leanna Page is, I've been calling it a philosophically grounded fantasy novel that follows this servant girl who has these mysterious powers that make her a threat to the royals that she serves. And it takes place in this mystical world called the World Within the Woods, and it's separated into these two kingdoms, and Leanna has a parent from either one of them. And in addition to that, she develops a very close connection to the world of fairies outside of the two human kingdoms who live in the woods. And so she grows up with this understanding that kind of everywhere is home and everyone is family. And as she grows up and gets more into the world, she realizes that the world doesn't tend to think of things that way. And so the more she speaks her mind, the more she gets into trouble. And as the danger grows and grows, she figures out that she's going to have to step out of her societally defined place in order to try and change the world if she's going to save the people that she loves.
Okay. Now, it just sounds like such a fairy tale. So let's talk about why did this concept or how did this concept come to you?
Yeah, that's kind of a fun little story. As a playwright or with other things I've written, I'm very used to the idea of coming up with either maybe a message or a theme and then kind of very purposely crafting a story around it. That wasn't like this for this one. In this case, I was reading this old book, and there was the author just referenced very briefly this old, even older than it, old story, and I didn't know what it was referring to. And I kind of just tried to context clue it for a second so I could keep reading. And within a second, this whole legend was just kind of in my head, to the point where I wasn't sure whether I remembered it or made it up. So I went and looked up what the author was referring to, and sure enough, it had nothing to do with what had just popped into my head. And so I realized that it was mine and that I kind of had to write it. So it very felt gifted to me rather than made up.
Okay. So you think, well, you know that this was a gift because of the way it came to you. Now, before we talk a little bit more about the book, tell me who Addam Ledamyen is.
Yeah. So my name is Addam, and I grew up in theater, acting, and just loving musicals and singing and dancing and all of that. That was always my entire life. And I knew that I wanted to make that an important part of what I did with my life. And then when I was in high school and getting ready to go to college and figuring out kind of what major I wanted to do and all of that, that was all happening in 2016, 2017. And given what started happening in those years, I suddenly got very interested in politics and trying to help the world, because it seemed to be going in a not great direction. And so I took a big shift, and I initially was going to go to school for political science in DC. And I did start that, but pretty quickly I realized that that direct path wasn't quite me either. And so I pretty quickly, I stayed at my school in DC, but I pretty quickly moved back to my to a musical theater major. But since then, it's been for me about combining those two things and finding how to use the arts and storytelling and these things that are so impactful for me and I know for so many others, and using those to achieve the larger goals for our society. So that's what I'm all about.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I identify with that a little bit because I also, this platform is to give people a voice and to give especially people that like storytelling a voice, and hence why we've found each other. So I do identify with that. And I think that it's a lot political, even though it doesn't necessarily look like it as a political platform, but it is because you are giving someone a platform to use their voice to share their message. And anytime you get to share your message, people are going to either take side or judge, and that's okay. It's important for you to say what you have to say so that the people who feel like that they can now identify with what you're saying and feel strength or draw strength from what your message is, then that is empowering. And whenever we get the opportunity to empower someone, we should stand up and deliver.
I absolutely agree. The biggest thing I realized with figuring out where I needed to focus my energy, with the political science major, it wasn't that the issue with that for me wasn't the idea of being involved in politics, because just as you say, I think all of everything we're doing here is all political. But in the world of politics, or at least in that political science major, the point of so many of the classes wasn't to think about how we change the world. It was to study, exactly how Congress functions, or exactly how to work. It was teaching how to work within a system that, frankly, I don't want to work inside of. I think we should change it. And that's not what those classes were about. And that's, I think, where I felt so much distance from it, because I wanted to do things in a different way. And that's why I love meeting people like you who are doing stuff like that.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the work that you're doing, because it shows the character, the kind of person that you really are.
Well, thank you.
So you chose to write in archaic language. And for me, words are very powerful. How do you write in an ancient language around characters who feel unmistakably contemporary?
Yeah, that is probably the nerdiest thing about me, is that I love that stuff. So there are a couple of reasons I did that, and one of them was just to give it that extra fantastical, legendary sense that, the feeling that this legend was kind of gifted to me. I wanted it to have that original text that felt like it was in that original kind of language. And so that's why I needed it to be that way. But also on the sort of political side of it, there's so many of all the stories that we think of as, or not all, but so many of the stories that get taught as the classics are written in this kind of language. And we're taught to almost revere anything in this kind of language. Even if we don't personally like it, we're taught that it's right in some way. And but then when we try to go back and read those things, so much of it is like so outdated. And even when the language is beautiful, sometimes they're saying things that are like, oh, okay, that's not great though. And so I wanted to give us something that is in that language, but that we can appreciate on a modern level. And I'd love the idea that as a larger literary movement, we could reclaim this kind of language and have another resurgence of writing in these, poetic, high vocabulary, whatever kind of things, without having to, or without sacrificing any of the heart in it.
So for me, when you were talking, I'm remembering, I'm reflecting on Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And one of the books that I think I enjoyed all of them, but one of the books that stood out to me the most when you were talking was The Merchant of Venice.
Yeah.
And that was, the language was not written for today,
right.
Period. And so with that said, I think it's important to write in our time, but I love that you're given this backstory or this ancient language so that we can start to think about what people are saying differently.
Yeah.
Because in The Merchant of Venice or in Shakespearean world, they say some foul things very poetically.
Yes.
And reflecting on that now, I remember reading The Merchant of Venice, and it took me some time to figure out some of the things. I can't remember exactly what, what I was trying to interpret at the time, but it took me a few times reading. As a matter of fact, I read The Merchant of Venice, I think in high school. And then I read it again when my friend's son was in high school. And then I read it again when I was doing my business, because it had some lessons on how to conduct business.
Sure.
After, when I recall.
Yeah.
So anyway, it is powerful. The arguments there are powerful, and writing in that, in those poetic terms, I think is very powerful. So thank you for encouraging us, because what that does is also it encourages us to translate as you're reading, right? And what I've learned is that when you are forced to translate another language, it develops a different part of your brain that helps for you to express your intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too that the more comfortable we can get, the more we read this kind of stuff, the more comfortable we get with it, the less high and mighty it feels, and the more we can humanize it and think that it's not some like impossible to touch type of writing thing. It's like, it's just a way that people used to write, and we could write that way if we wanted to, and we don't all want to, and we shouldn't all, but it's a tool that we can have in our toolkit, and both being able to read comfortably all of the things from before is a very strong tool for us, so that we can critique it in all of the important ways and learn from it in all of the ways that it can. And I think writing in it is such a good way to, at least for me, it's been a really powerful way to just learn it and be able to interact with it in meaningful ways.
Also, do you think it was important for the mystical part of Leanna to come out in that language?
For me, it was.
Yeah.
For me, and I say this early on in an introduction as well, but I wanted the mystical fairy tale and all of it to come from this archaic voice, to have this sort of majesty about it that we associate with that kind of writing style, and I think it it wouldn't have the same, it wouldn't fully serve the purpose I'm hoping it would without it.
You've said that the entire story popped into your head at once. And you weren't even sure in that moment whether you had remembered it or made it up. Take us back to that moment. What happened?
Yeah, it was kind of magical. That I hesitate to go into too much detail about what exactly popped into my head because it's a little bit of a spoiler. But
we don't want that. We don't want that.
But essentially, a lot of the details I've manufactured later, but in that moment it was this larger vision of this woman, Leanna Page, and her effects on this world that she lives in, and what that world looked like and behaved like. That's what all showed up for me very suddenly, and I've had an interesting journey just personally, as an atheist, and then now mostly just question marks on that front. But honestly, a lot of it, or a good deal of some of those questions for me started when this story showed up in my head, because I couldn't explain it. And I know there's easily some maybe subconscious something or other and something, I don't know. But it really felt magical in a way that really affected me. And just, up until that moment, I had never, or I hadn't been writing novels. I'm a playwright, and that was my main interest.
Right.
And I tried a couple of times even to think like, well, can I, maybe this story can be a play, but there was just something that felt already real about it that I needed to bring to fruition, and I knew that needed some original text in the form of a novel.
So I understand that the book is credited to a character named Cedar Flight.
Yes.
Not to you as the author. That's a bold, creative choice, don't you think?
Thank you. That choice ties right back into this feeling I'm talking about, where it wasn't mine to begin with. Was sort of the feeling there, and particularly, so many of these legends that we have, at least in Western culture, we have the Robin Hood and King Arthur and that stuff. It's like they're fiction, but they have that thing back in the past that you can kind of tie into and say like, oh, maybe some of it was kind of real. And I wanted the Legend of Leanna Page to have that too. And so the way that I gave it that is through Cedar Flight. And Cedar Flight, their story is that they are, their grandfather traveled from Alenvia, or the world within the woods, as once the story of Leanna Page has been done for centuries and centuries, that her society is still living on and has all these stories of her. And Jemison Flight one day traveled through the infinite woods and ended up in our world and realized that we didn't have that story, and so started telling it to his children and his grandchildren, who Cedar Flight is. And now Cedar Flight is finally sharing it with us to say that it is real somewhere. And hopefully we can learn from what Leanna did for her world and try and do that for ours.
So Leanna is a servant girl with mystical powers that makes her dangerous to the very people that she serves. Why does her story, or what does her story say about who society decides is a threat and why?
Yeah. I think for Leanna, the most threatening thing about her is that people wouldn't expect her to be a threat. And so and even, she is a threat in their minds, but all she's trying to do is help people, and but she does so in a way that's goes against how people look at the world. When she's saying early on, there's a lot of prejudice from the humans against the fairies, but she has dear friends who are fairies, so she's early on saying, like, what are you talking about? Like, why do you hate them? And it's even just asking these questions, saying, like, well, why is it that way? Why should it be that way? And those questions alone are threats to a status quo that can't answer them with any particular rationality. And
Wow.
so I think that translates very directly to our world now, because there's a lot of, social constructs and illusions, frankly, that we've tied so much of how society works into these. And it just takes some questions to start poking at it, and people can get very afraid of those questions very quickly.
And I think that people can get very afraid of questions because they themselves have not thought about why they have these prejudice or why they have these feelings. They've never thought about it because most of the times it's taught by the adults or the elders or the people of power. And so they don't think about it. The people in control, maybe the school teachers, the parents, the people who have the authority, has been indoctrinating you, and you're not even sure how did you come to this feeling. How did you come to this conclusion? How did you come to thinking this way? You haven't even thought of it. So now when you start to hear the questions, it becomes whoa, 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 whoa. But it's a good thing to have those questions because it forces the person to think. They may get defensive initially, but it forces the person to think. And I think just like today, it is present, those prejudices and how people feel about certain communities and certain races and certain people in your community. So you feel a certain way because of how the story you were told, but have you looked at it? I see now in so many different things. We've been told certain things about even controversial things like 9/11. We've been told certain things about that. We've been told why we were going to war with certain countries. And then years later, when we're able to examine more truths, then we start to see things differently because we're like, oh wow, we were never even given the opportunity to see it differently. And then you start to feel bad about how you thought about certain people because you treated them according to how you believe they should be treated based on the propaganda that you believed.
Yeah.
Not knowing it was a propaganda.
Yeah. I think that's one of the differences between at least certain types of thought processes in certain people. Like some start to hear the questions and think about them and recognize where thinking used to be faulty and change and feel bad. And then for others, sometimes they double down on it. They hear the questions and even maybe understand that they had faulty logic to some extent, but to think that they at one point were wrong is even a scarier thought than any of it. So they double down, and it's once you get into that kind of headspace, it's particularly hard to reach somebody, I think. And I hope that's where maybe fiction can step in and allow them to step out of it for a moment and maybe look at things a little bit differently at some point.
You've said your creative interest is in the better world we can imagine. not the dystopian worlds we fear. And that's a powerful statement. In a publishing landscape that is so obsessed with darkness and destruction and war and divisiveness, why does hope take more courage to write than despair?
Yeah. I think for one thing, it can be harder to hold on to and trust. And it can be less, hope can be less dramatic, I think, in the fictional sense. It's people, it's easy to get people excited by, being terrified for some reason. And at least that's, I think, what has been particularly popular lately. And through writing this, I do struggle with that a little bit, and try and balance the idea that there is always, there is that divisiveness, there is all of that, but can we also find realistic ways to hold on to that hope and to find ways out of those darker pathways? And I think that takes a lot of thought power that goes beyond storytelling in the traditional sense. It goes, why I keep calling it a philosophically grounded. It's it's more than a fairy tale for me, at least. It's between this book and the its sequel, which is in the works. These are very much my proposals for why don't we try this, and I don't know that everyone is necessarily thinking about writing that when they're working on their fantasy novel or something like that.
I noted that the book has many LGBTQ characters, and you started writing the book as someone who identified one way, but yet you finished it as someone who identified very differently. How did writing these characters change you, and how did changing you change the characters?
Yeah. So yeah, just to clarify, so I was, this book took me about, I started that first moment when it popped in my head. That was right before I started college, and then I finished the first draft of it right like in the end of senior year. So it took about, and then a couple of years of editing took place after that. So in total, it took about probably 5 to 6 years to write. And at the beginning of that, I was, as far as I knew, I was a straight cisgendered woman. And over the next few years, I slowly started realizing each year I kind of had a different revelation of a different aspect of my identity. First, it was I was bi, and then I was asexual, and then I was non-binary, and then I was trans, and kind of figuring out, it's all starting to settle into a cohesive identity. But it's definitely been one of those journeys that I think a lot of queer folks can relate to, and throughout that process, and I think the part of the openness to relating to those identities probably started in my fiction, because I can go back to other things I've written too and find like where I was where I was putting myself into certain characters, and where those queer identities were starting to shape up before I was fully conscious of them. And then so that probably opened my heart to being faster to think about it once I did start recognizing it myself. And then once I really figured myself out and was coming out about different things, then it became a bit more of a personal, kind of almost a responsibility. Like once I was like, oh, I am all of these things and I understand it to those, to that very personal extent, that then it became about making sure that I was representing those things in all of the ways that I could. And particularly writing it into this book with its archaic language was an exciting challenge, because that those olden days words, we don't have any of the labels that we have for all of the different queer identities, and there's so many labels, and they're very helpful in their time, and they're helpful for what they are, but having to describe, for example, a non-binary character without saying the word non-binary, or without saying anything, without using the words, gender dysphoria or anything like that, it became much more about describing the specifics of who this person is. And you had to get, or I had to dig deeper into how do you describe this human without just throwing a label on it. And that was a really fun adventure for me, because even for me personally, it allowed me to step away from labels and say, like, well, I can describe myself the same ways too. Like I can describe myself as a whole human without necessarily using labels if I don't want to. And that was powerful for me personally. And I hope that reading about queer people without necessarily using all of those labels that can be so quickly divisive nowadays, I hope that it can help humanize us, and maybe be a softer landing pad for people to come and understand.
Do you think it is dangerous to label or unlabel ourselves too early on in life? Because I think both extremes carry risks.
Yes, absolutely. I think, as I was saying, I think labels, especially I'll speak for the queer ones, that are very helpful for finding other people who are feeling similar things. If it weren't for being able to call it something, I think a lot of us would think we're either weird, or we're broken, or we're not knowing that there's other people out there who are feeling similar things. And so for that reason, primarily, I absolutely think finding, labeling even communities, and then understanding that you have connections to those communities is really helpful. And I think at any age that is appropriate and useful. And then once we can do that, and we understand that that we're good, and other people are having similar things, and we can all support that in a positive way, then I think it's good to step back from that and say, okay, but maybe we don't have to identify as a human under this label. We can say that we contain multitudes, and one of them is this, or at least is similar to this. But even there's so much that exists on a spectrum, and everyone's experience of one particular label is so different. And even though they have similarities, we don't want to get into the habit of assuming everyone under any particular label is experiencing the same thing. So I think there's a balance to be struck of finding your own independent humanity and using labels to connect with other people who are having similar experiences.
I think the question I'd like to ponder even more is labeling serving or I'd like for the person who's listening, not just for the listener, I would like for you to ponder, is the label serving your growth, or is it limiting you in this journey? Is it removing, or is removing the label an act of freedom or an act of fear. And I think that's so important for you to think about as you are in this journey, because it is a journey. And like for Addam, for you, which I think is commendable and so perfect, is that you didn't, I don't feel like you rushed to give yourself any label. I think you were trying, or you were working on yourself. And as a part of working on yourself and finding out, more about yourself in this 4 years of writing and becoming, the book also held space for you to have this natural discovery.
Yeah.
So I commend you, and I implore the reader or the listener to get your book and read your book, and that will probably give them more of an eye opener as to how to, even though you're not talking about your journey specifically, the world of Leanne is so intertwined because of all the different characters and all the different people who think that they are so different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. I absolutely hope that this book can help people with that. So much of it is, it speaks pretty directly to certain issues, but it does so through a veil of mystical analogy. And so I think it can be a safe entry point for people who are working through journeys like that. And I hope it can be useful for sure.
And I believe that you are using this book as an act of activism.
I would agree. Thank you.
It's to me, I see that this book is, a place where people can really see how someone like Leanna can make a difference when she thought that everything was perfect, because in her world everything was good. It is once she entered different people and she saw that there was they were not so accepting of some of her friends, that she thought, oh wow,
Yeah.
how could this be? How did the writing process, how did it progress when you had an idea to write 50 pages in the beginning and then it ended up into a full novel? How did that happen?
Yeah, the biggest shift for me was frankly just learning how to write a novel and to write one in this style particularly. In the beginning, it was, as you said, the first draft was like 50 pages long, and it was very sparse and kind of taking cues from like fairy tales or things where they don't quite get as deep into characters. It's more, a story, or a short story of some kind. And that's kind of what I was initially modeling things after. But I think as time went on and as certain people would read it and give me some feedback and stuff, the notes I kept getting was, we want to hear more, we want to hear more, we want to hear more. And that's
so dangerous to say to an author.
I know. Yeah, and then in addition to that, I went back and started reading some more classic literature, and especially novels by Anne Radcliffe, who was just, I love her writing. It's just beautiful. And I took a lot of cues from that about how to utilize that language. And so between all of that, things just kept getting longer and more deep. And the more, as I was developing as a person, as the world was developing as it is, there was more to say. And I within reason, I've tried to get it pretty much all in there.
You did a pretty good job. Where can the listener find your book?
Yeah, so the Legend of Leanna Page is available on all any of the online book selling places, so Amazon or bookshop.org or Barnes and Noble. I would love if people want to support their independent bookstores. You should be able to just walk into any of them and ask them to order it, and they should be able to do that for you. Or if you go to the publisher's website, forelenvia.org, and that's FORELENVIA.org. We have all of those listed out, and you could also buy it directly from us at a slight discount. So it's all over the place.
Beautiful. Are you going on a book tour, in-person book tour?
I would like to. I haven't started it yet, but I would certainly like to.
Where are you joining me from?
Martinez, California, just about 20 minutes outside of San Francisco. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we have an annual authors conference in Rockland, New York. I will hope that you're available and you can come to that. We have, oh my goodness, it's a place where you can stand on your story with confidence, but it's also a place where you get to interact with other people that can really take you to the next level. There's PR, of course, in the room. There's podcasters in the room. There's movie directors in the room. There's so many different people for you to interact with and see what works for you and what can happen with your story. You never know.
Well, that would be amazing. Please give me the details about that, and I will absolutely be there.
Certainly. So so we can get your book at all of the Barnes and Noble. What if we wanted a signed copy? Did you mention where we can get a signed copy?
Oh, I have not. At this time, the way to get a signed copy would be to go to forelenvia.org, and you can look for we have a contact sheet, and you can just write to us and ask, and we will get it to you.
Excellent. Now, before you go, there are a few questions that I love to ask each of my guests, so don't think you're going to get away. What's a bold promise that you can share with our audience?
The bold promise that I would like to make about this book, especially, is that I'm very interested in challenging the connection between, or what is viewed as a necessary connection between art and capitalism. So I very purposely didn't want this book to go through traditional publishing means because I wanted a bit more control over who could access it. And specifically, I wanted to make it so that anyone could access it. And so on forelenvia.org, we have a part of the website is called our free library, and you just sign up with a free account. And I'm working on getting the full text of the book up there that could be read for free. And I want all of the books that we publish eventually to be up there in that way as well. It is obviously very helpful for us if people purchase it with money, or if they could donate to us as a nonprofit. But as we've been talking about all of this, everything that we do with art, especially when we have a mission as this one, I don't want money to be a barrier to people reading it. And while we can't send out physical copies of the book or too many of them for free because that costs us money, we can put it up on the internet for free. And that is in the works. And so I want everyone to be able to read this if they want to.
You are beautiful inside and out.
Thank you.
What bold statement might cause a paradigm shift?
Yeah. If it's all right, I'd love to read a little passage from the book for this one.
Oh, please do.
So this is later on in the book, and it's not a huge spoiler. There begins to be a wall that's being built between the two main kingdoms, and it's this enormous wall that could impossible to cross. And in this part of the book, Leanna has found a way to climb up to the top of it, and there's this. She remained kneeling there for some time, gazing upon the stone beneath her, attempting to catch a breath that insisted on running, both from exertion and, in equal parts, excitement and fear. She lifted her gaze and saw the pattern of stones she stood upon stretch out into the horizon, taking up all her sight except what her periphery could detect of the surrounding countryside. Finally standing, she walked some paces forward, lifting her chest and letting her shoulders down as she confidently strode upon the border of the two kingdoms. Stepping to the wall's edge to her left, she peered over it and found the Guahanu River raging directly beneath. Looking up, all of Mazur was laid bare before her. The outlying villages which she had never had the opportunity to enter were closer than they had ever been, and still indefinitely out of reach. Nearer, just on the opposite riverbed, she could make out the unique rocky landscape that housed the abandoned ruins of the ancient city of Paveline that the Oxbians of Mazur had overtaken all those centuries ago. At this, she turned to her right, taking in the villages of Paveline's current kingdom. Massive plains of grain were scattered with homes and vegetable gardens, a web of tawny dirt paths tethering one to the next, all connecting to the same central road which ran from the Guahanu straight to the Paveline castle. Liana looked again to her left, knowing an identical path could be followed from thence to the citadel of Mazur. Laying aside some differences in architecture and landscape, each kingdom seemed, from her present vantage, to be so much alike that it felt strange to think of them as two, when, as was evident to her now, they so easily could have been one. And that last part is a major point of the whole story for me, which is that the world is one big world, and we only separate it at our destruction, I think.
At our destruction. Beautifully said. Thank you so much. The hills she has never been stood out to me while you were reading that, because sometimes we have such big dreams and they feel like mountains that we have to climb. But she stared out looking at them, and to me that was a symbolism as, if you can see it, you can do it. So thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
Thank you so much.
Well written, beautifully done. There's another a final question. What, you've done so much. You are a movement yourself. What bold moves do you have planned for the future?
There's a lot on the horizon, but I think the most consistent answer to this question is going to be that is just persistence. There's so much that encourages us to give up nowadays, I think. And at least for me right now, the boldest thing just day to day feels like continuing to decide not to give into those things, and to, I've got this to-do list written up of long-term things. I'd love to see a movie of this, or and I one thing is that we have a call out for submissions right now, so I want to start working with all different artists who we can publish and produce plays from, to get everyone else's ideas of how to build their better world and everything that we can start building that with. So all sorts of projects and things like that. But none of that is possible if any of us decide to stop. And so just that day-to-day choice of continuing and deciding that we are going to keep working on all this, I think is the bold move that I make every day.
Wow. You get more and more impressive with each as the conversation goes on. And if today's episode moved you as a listener, please go out and find The Legend of Leanna Page. I like that we have this platform where we have not just traditional authors. This is mostly the authors who come here on this Bold Book of the Day podcast are self-published authors. And I love that this stage, this platform gives them a place to share their message. And I am so grateful that we had this conversation. It was a conversation that it just was everything and more than I hoped it would be. So thank you, Addam Ledamyen. You are proof that a story can be ancient and urgent at the same time, that you can write in this beautiful language of legends and still be speaking directly to the world we are living in right now. The message is clear, and if today's episode sounds different, it's because it is meant for you to reflect on what different means. So follow the work of Addam Ledamyen. And you're on Instagram, right?
Yes, I am. Yeah, people could follow me on there for sure.
Okay, please drop your Instagram handle or your social media handles.
Yes, I'm. It's just at Addam Ledamyen. It's just my name, so anyone can find me through that.
Thank you so much for the world you're building.
Thank you so much for this platform. It's been so great to be able to talk to you and to see all the work you're doing. It's amazing.
And you're amazing. And when you're amazing, you can't go unnoticed.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. Please come back again, or I'll see you in September at the Authors Conference.
That would be amazing. Thank you.
All right. Guys, if you are interested in writing your book and you need some help, first of all, I know that there's artificial intelligence, and it is a wonderful tool that we can use, but it cannot write your book. So if you're thinking that artificial intelligence can write your book, it is not going to give you the tone that reflects who you truly are. So if you have written your book with artificial intelligence, join us in our boot camp or in our writing incubator, where we can help you shape your book into something that reflects who you truly are. Okay, so if you're interested, join us at the Writing Incubator. You can go follow me on Instagram at author Denise Nicholson, and you will see how easily you can get into the room. We have free classes, we have free webinars, and we have free boot camps. So if you're interested, there is a way to help you get your idea out of your head and onto paper and finally published and making a difference, just like Addam Ledamyen.
Thank you for joining us for the Bold Book of the Day with Dr. Denise Nicholson, a central hub and a safe space for authors to share their stories. Follow Dr. Denise on Facebook and Instagram at Denise Nicholson, or go to denisenicholson.com. Remember, no one can share your story better than you.